When I'm channeling the Z's, I will close my eyes and I will let them come through me. And their language and their cadence is slightly different to my own. And if it's me as an intuitive, I would sound very much like I sound right now. And I would seem the more grounded version of myself than when I'm closed eyed and channeling. But I open up a kind of dimension of seeing that I can kind of close or open. When I was 23, I was a student of self-growth and a student of metaphysics. And so I would take myself to workshops, shamanism, yoga, everything. And I was looking into everything. And I was really enjoying it. And at the age of 23, I was on the underground, the subway in London, where I worked at the time, going to my then job in fundraising. And I heard this voice from the left-hand side of my head. I was in my own thoughts that morning, and a lot of the thoughts were self-judgmental, as was quite normal for me in my early 20s. And I was also, at the time, I remember I was thinking about a relationship I was in and a boyfriend I had. And we were disagreeing about something, and I was having a replay of that conversation in my head, and I was deciding that he was wrong. And all of a sudden I heard this voice and it said, "That's an interesting thought, but you're wrong. And here's why." And then they explained why it was my issue, not his. And it was one of those weird moments, because at the time I remember hearing the voice, and of course you're surprised you're hearing a voice, but I was also quite taken with what they said. So what they said had an immediate effect on me. It wasn't just that psychologically what they were saying seemed sound and made sense. It was like good advice from a therapist or something. It also changed my body. So if my body was in a more constricted kind of negative state, to match the negative thoughts in the mind, I noticed that my body just kind of shifted and opened. And so I very quickly said, "Who are you? What are you?" Because it didn't feel like any voice I'd ever heard before. I was very familiar with my own voices of my own mind. And they said, "We're your guides, and we've been with you your whole life. You haven't heard us since you were 6 years old." Well, I don't remember hearing them before 6 years old. And yeah, we're your guide group. So over the years, I asked more questions. And what I came to understand is that they're a group, which threw me at the time, because I'd only heard of channelers channeling one being. And they said, some of us have been incarnate as humans on Earth. Some of us have not. We are a voice of galactic source. So source as in SOURCE. Source energy I understood, and galactic was not a word I was that familiar with. So what they were saying was that we are a consciousness library. We are not just coming from the angelic realm, and we are not just coming from or what some might call the galactic or the cosmic or the alien realm. They say we have many voices within this collective, and we are here as part of your guide team as we go through this shift. Now, at that point, I never thought I would do it for work. That wasn't the thing. I just thought, oh, wow, I've heard my own guides. And the biggest problem for me was that it was so simple. In my head, people who heard their guides should have probably been like a raw vegan yogi or on some kind of retreat, or they've just purified themselves. And here was I, a normal human being who was seeking self-growth and healing. So I guess I was different to my peers in my teens, that I was going off to tarot readings and self-growth. I clearly that world already made sense to me, even though I was having to deprogram myself from the societal conditioning that back in, the early 90s in the UK, this kind of stuff was not normal. Yet for me, it was becoming a normal part of my secret life, which was my spiritual life. So I'd had to come out as gay when I was 16. And then I came out as a channeler at some point in my 20s, and it was way harder to come out as a channeler.
As I'm talking to you here in this conversation, am I talking to Lee Harris, the person? Am I talking to Z, your guide, this group of guides? 88 of them, I hear, are in this group. That's quite a gaggle.
Yes.
Or some combination?
No, because you're asking me a question about my life experience, and particularly my life experience that day when I was 23. This was new to me on that day. So no, if you were asking me something more conceptual, or you were asking me a question about the world at large, or you were asking me a question relating to your own specific life and path, at that point, I would probably be a hybrid of some of the Z's information and some of my own senses as an intuitive. It's almost like turning a flashlight on. So I did one-on-one sessions for 15 years, for example. And how that would go is you would come to my session. I would know whatever name you had given me. And I would normally speak to you for 25 minutes before you asked me any question. Now, that wasn't disease necessarily. That was me, the human intuitive, going into the mode of turn the flashlight on Tammy and tell Tammy what you are hearing about her life, her soul, her path, her destiny. And that would usually result in like a 25-minute monologue from me, basically. So there are two ways I work. When I'm channeling the Z's, I will close my eyes and I will let them come through me. And their language and their cadence is slightly different to my own. And if it's me as an intuitive, I would sound very much like I sound right now. And I would seem the more grounded version of myself than when I'm closed eyed and channeling. But I open up a kind of dimension of seeing that I can kind of close or open. At this point, I can close or open it. I can, if I'm in the grocery store, I don't tend to turn that on. But sometimes in the grocery store, that can be handy.
I was thinking about how people who might be listening to this and have whatever judgments they might be bringing to the notion of quote unquote channeling, and what are they going to make of this conversation? And what I thought to myself was, once people have their own direct experience it's interesting when you talked about being on the subway and feeling the shape of your felt sense
Mm.
shifting. You felt really different and you heard a voice. And once you have that yourself, you're open. You want to know what's going on because you have your own inner reference point for it. If you've never had that, it's a lot harder. And one of the things I discovered is that you actually teach people how to open up to greater levels of intuition and even channeling. And I thought we could actually start our conversation learning more about that for the person who's like, I want to have a direct experience of guides coming through me. I really want that.
I love that you bring up the skepticism piece versus the experience piece, because I think I get asked that a lot. Sometimes people will say, how do I convince my skeptical husband? And I'm like, I never advise trying to convince anybody who's skeptical, because they're reporting their true experience. And it is true. It takes an experience for that to shift. Regarding the teaching of channeling, there are a couple of things that I do. The first thing is not really a teaching at all. It's more an explanation of what I think is happening. When I first started channeling, I was quite quickly taken into the channeling world, which was a side of self-development that I didn't know existed. I didn't know there was a world where channeling conferences happened and that people want to go and sit and listen to channels all day. That was not the world I was a student of, so I didn't know. And I noticed in those rooms that people, of course, go there for information or the vibrational shift. But over the years, I started to realize, oh, this is interesting. Channeling is kind of an initiation energy. I think some people think they're listening to a channeled being because maybe, or hopefully, the being has information that has a higher perspective or a useful perspective that's going to help you expand, become more spiritual in your outlook, understand your life more. And all of that is true. But there's a more hidden aspect, I think, which is when you resonate with channeled energy, it is some part of you, your own higher self, your own intuition. Potentially, you may end up channeling your own guides. That's not always the case for everybody. But I feel like channeling energy is its own transmission. And I think people like being in it because they like getting used to it. And at a certain point, people start either channeling for themselves or they become a bit more like that energy. Much like for myself as a channeler, of course, 26 years later, I'm very influenced by what the Z's have told me, what has come through my body. I'm still the evolution of who I was as a human being 26 years ago, but very influenced by their perspective. So I think the first piece with teaching channeling is the osmosis effect of being in the room when that kind of energy is happening, and seeing if it affects you and your body. The second thing that I advise people to do is to practice what some refer to as automatic writing. I know that Julia Cameron, someone told me once, oh, this is like Julia Cameron's morning pages, which is a stream of consciousness in the morning where you let things flow through you. So I always encourage people to sit quietly for a minute, or get yourself comfortable, sit quietly with a pen and paper, or with a sheet of a document on your tablet, your screen, if you prefer typing, and ask yourself a question. So, for example, the question might be, I always say a good question to start with is, soul, how am I doing today? So you direct the question to your soul or your higher self. Some people might prefer the terminology God. Some people might prefer to say guides, how am I doing? But you just ask a general opening question to see, how am I doing? And the question invites an answer. And that's how a lot of channeling works. I think people forget that channeling is a very participatory act. Unless you are a trance channel, and there are less of those these days because we are more capable of interacting with this level of consciousness from where we stand today. Whereas if you go back in time, this is what my guides have said,